Well, first of all, we know recovery from DP is possible. So that removes a whole bunch of weight off our shoulders. So if you're listening to this, I would just say there's light at the end of the tunnel. But what should be also making it even more exciting to get to the end of the tunnel is the fact that you come out the other side a lot stronger, a lot more resilient, and you might even live a happier life. DP is a phase. If you treat it the right way, it's going to go away.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Sam Henniver from Los Angeles, California. Sam is 38 years old and works as a software engineer. In June of 2021, he developed Chronic Depersonalization Derealization Disorder triggered by work stress, an unhealthy lifestyle, and an experience on psychedelic mushrooms. Sam's symptoms included existential thoughts, strange and unreasonable fears, and chronic feelings of disconnection, and he struggled with these symptoms for about 6 months. As Sam wrote to me in a recent email, quote, "After endlessly searching online, all of a sudden the right search keywords brought me to your DP videos, and suddenly life started to feel hopeful again. It wasn't just me, I wasn't losing my mind, I wasn't possessed by some demon, and I had not permanently damaged my brain. I really don't know where I would have been had I not come across that first video that night. I might have even ended my life. But now, more than 3 years later, I'm fully recovered and I couldn't be happier. Life is beautiful, colourful and meaningful despite any challenges that come my way. I've been promoted at work, I've faced the fear of public speaking, and I'm getting pretty good at it. I exercise, work, have fun, hang out with family and friends on a weekly basis, and I enjoy every moment of it." End quote. And Sam is with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from depersonalization, derealization disorder. Sam, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Sean. It's been a while. How are you?
I'm good. It has been a while. How have you been?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Life is good.
Good. I think, but by all accounts, you're a very, very busy man with work.
Yeah, I like being busy. And it's a choice. It's not something that I blindly go through life, but I decided that it works for me and I like being busy. But yeah, can't complain. I love it. I love every bit of it.
Yeah. I like being busy too. Sometimes it gets the better of me and I have to kind of consciously reduce the work hours, but it's a good way to be, I think. So you're can you tell us a bit more about your work, Sam, in software engineering?
Sure. So I have difficulty defining what I do because I don't like the title that I have. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but officially on LinkedIn, at least on my LinkedIn profile, it says Vice President of Engineering. But I like staying technical and I do my best every single day to kind of deal with something technical in terms of coding and software development. But as you mentioned in the introduction, when you mentioned I was promoted about a few years ago, right in the midst of my DPDR, my boss reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want you to run the entire engineering team." And I said, "No, I don't want to do this. I don't think I'm the right person. I don't think I'm in the right mindset to do this." But since then, I have not been doing as much coding. So even though I still consider myself an engineer, and I would love to remain an engineer, but I don't do as much engineering as much as I just managing expectations, working with the C-suite, understanding their requirements, and then translating them and communicating them with the engineering team to make sure that we're all aligned in the same direction, achieving our goals.
Wow, that's very impressive. Yeah. So Sam, can you tell us a bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Sure, I can do that, but I don't know if that it's okay with you that I go back and start from the beginning, maybe a few years before the DP and DR, because they're all kind of connected and maybe would help also the viewers that went through the same journey as me in order to understand where I come from and not thinking that if they experience the same journey, it's something that is different from other folks who experience DPDR. Do you mind? We might have to go back a little bit to 2016, 2015. Is that okay?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. No, I'm eager to hear the whole story, Sam, and I'm sure
Sure.
everyone watching the interview is too. So please.
Awesome. Perfect. So as you just made the introduction, I was a software developer. I came to the United States about 14, 15 years ago as a student. And what happened is that after I graduated college, I wanted to start working. And I soon realized it's a very difficult transition from going from being a student in the US to becoming on a work visa, if you call it. And the reason for that is there was nothing I had control over. Unfortunately, the work visa situation is pretty complicated. There's a lot of people who apply. So there's only a few portion of, or a few fraction of that individuals who apply normally end up getting the work visa. So in 2014, I was working with a work-ish type visa in Northern California in San Francisco, soon to realize that everything that I had worked for is going to diminish and just going to disappear because my work visa additional extension of it was not approved. And this started to cause a ton of stress in my life. Something that I had worked for so hard started to kind of collapse on me as something that I had no control over. So instead of just finding ways to deal with this in the more appropriate way, I decided that after work, I would just hang out with friends, and sometimes alone. I would get the first beer and I would get the second beer, and the beer turned into having a shot of scotch or having second shot of scotch. And it got to a point that it got quite destructive, I would say, towards the end in maybe late 20 or mid 2015, which was the last few weeks and few months of my work, because my work visa was about to expire. I would show up to work pretty much every single day with a hangover, nothing to be proud of. And I realized this is really not the right way to live my life. I decided to move back after I stopped working to Los Angeles to stay with my family and start looking to ways that maybe I can figure out how to deal with the situation. And also, as an engineer and someone who solves problems, I thought, you know what, maybe there's a better way to handle the stress. There's nothing I can do about the situation. What can I do to handle my stress? Because it's being destructive, it's affecting every single day of my life. And if you go to Google and say how to manage stress, two things normally pop up. The first one is you have to work out and exercise. Great, everyone knows that. I'm not the type that wants to go out and do jogging for 40 minutes every day. The second one was meditation. So I started practicing meditation. It just didn't click for me. I was like, this is still not for me. It doesn't work. So while I'm waiting to figure out what happens to me next, I decided that I'll just go out and maybe just find any book that I find and just read some books, gain some new experience. And this is in that transitional period that my work visa has expired. So I had only one option to go back to the university, even though I didn't want to. So I can go back to a student visa. And everyone's telling me you're pretty much screwed because at this point, going back to a work visa is almost impossible. So this is late in 2015. And I tried meditation, didn't work. And while I'm waiting, I just go to Barnes and Noble. It's a popular bookstore in the US. And aimlessly, I would walk around the shelves and grab any kind of book that I could find and read it. One time, as I'm walking, I see the cover of a book that says Steve Jobs. That's interesting. I took it out, and obviously Steve Jobs had died a few years before in 2011. This is late 2015. So I take the book out. I read the first chapter right on the floor of Barnes and Noble. I was like, wow, what an interesting life. And I read the second chapter. Then they wanted to close the store, so they wanted to kick me out. I bought the audiobook, and I popped into my car as I'm driving back home. And I was so excited to read the rest of his life. One thing that I learned from his life is that he went through a kind of similar phase, that he had very negative thoughts. He was not very happy with his life. He was an adopted kid. So he decided to go to India and learn about meditation. And there he came across this book called Be Here Now.
Yes.
With someone called Ram Dass. Exactly.
Yes.
I was like, I got to get my hands on this book. So I immediately ordered it. I couldn't find it at Barnes & Noble. So I ordered the book, Be Here Now, and I read this book. So, I don't know if I understand what this means. So I read it the second time and the third time. It's like, it's very interesting. The design of it is very different. The pages are very different. It's a very, very intriguing book, but I'm not sure if I follow this. But that kind of opened up the door for me from there to getting more into Eastern meditation techniques and Eastern spirituality, if you will. So I got my next book, which was a book written by Eckharte Tolle called The Power of Now. And I read The Power of Now. Then I decided I want to read the next book, which is A New Earth. And I'm reading all of this and I'm kind of filling up my brain with all of this, but I'm still not quite understanding what they're talking about. But what the effect that they had is that I actually managed to, I stopped drinking. I started living better. I started adjusting my diet as I'm reading some of these books. And I realized this is not really unique to me, what I'm experiencing. The feeling of maybe disappointment, maybe the feeling of frustration, the feeling of anxiety, something that a lot of people experience, including the great Steve Jobs. And right around that time, I ended up getting a job, which was very, very odd. Again, most people told me it's almost impossible, and that company decided that they would sponsor my visa, and I started working again towards the end of 2016, and I could just ditch school now and go back, and they managed to get my visa, and life is more or less good and happy. And I met my wife. We got married I met my wife in 2016, right around those time that I started to calm down and stop kind of pushing things the way that I wanted to. Things started happening organically, and they were a lot better, more than if I had started to imagine or started to push for a certain way for them to happen. So things happened organically. I met my wife, and 2 years later in 2018, we got married. I continued working, and everything was more or less good. And at that point, I was stabilized in the U.S. My wife was a U.S. citizen, so I got my green card through her. And at this point, maybe it's again 2018, 2019, I started thinking, so now what? My goal was to get a job. My goal was to get stabilized in the US. And all of that is now, they have all happened. What am I going to do next? Right when I'm grappling with all of these different ideas, and maybe some of them not very positive way of thinking, pandemic happens. And we go into a 2020 pandemic. And my wife is a nurse, so she spends a lot of work, more than before at work. There's always the risk of her coming back home with COVID. And I was like, you know what? All I can do is I'm going to continue working. So we all moved to remote work. Luckily, as a software developer, I could just work from home. And when I had nothing else to do, I would just start drinking, going back to the same old habit of maybe having a couple of beers because I was bored while I'm watching TV. And then I was like, alcohol gives me hangovers. Maybe I should try weed. So I started smoking weed. So I would just smoke the first joint, and then hopefully that's okay for me to share all of this.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. No, please, Sam. Yeah.
And then I thought, this is a little bit too difficult. And I started getting those electric pens, or the electric cigarettes, and there were weed cigarettes. So very easy. I could wake up in the morning, and this habit of mine got worse and worse as we got deeper and deeper into COVID. As we went into lockdown towards the end of 2020, especially weekends, I would wake up, and the first thing I would do, I would grab the pen, the e-cigarette, and I would spend my entire weekend being completely high. And that's the only way that I would get productive. If I wanted to clean up and tidy up my room, I had to take a hit and then start cleaning up, because that's how I would calm down, and not realizing that what kind of damage I'm causing both to my brain as well as to my the physiological portion of my body. And I continue to read all these books. I'm still trying to understand what it means to be enlightened, what it means to be entirely happy, because that's the ultimate goal, for everybody to be completely happy and satisfied. I spoke to a few from my friends, and I knew that Steve Jobs had experimented with psychedelics, and that's what triggered Steve Jobs in early ages of, I guess when he was around 20, to decide to move to India, to understand how can you achieve that state that when you're on psychedelic and everything feels so warm and cozy and comfortable without having to use psychedelics. I had never experienced that. In 2016, something that I didn't mention is that I did go to a Vipassana meditation retreat, which was a silent 10-day retreat. And I got a sense of what it means to be completely stress-free, because you're disconnected from the world, you're disconnected from news, you're disconnected from everything. But I still didn't have that extreme feeling of complete serenity that I was looking for. And I was like, I've tried everything. I've tried meditation. I've tried reading these books multiple times. I have not tried psychedelics. Maybe I should try it. And one thing to mention is I had thought about this for many, many years. Maybe since in 2016 when I picked up Steve Jobs' book, I had thought about this, and I never took it as a joke. I never thought psychedelics is a party drug. I always treated it with respect. And that's why I was very hesitant. Should I or should I not try this? So I decided at some point in 2021, this is early 2021, that I want to pull the trigger and try this. And maybe this is the answer that I'm looking for, because 6 years later, 5 years later, I'm still not really any closer to the idea of enlightenment, if you will, if that's what was the ultimate goal. And also, I'm not really any happier. I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve, more or less, but I'm still not really happy. If anything, I feel more anxious than before, not knowing that smoking and drinking and having bad diet, because I was eating all kinds of not really healthy food, from oily food, from hot dogs and pizza every day. I was not really thinking and aware of what I'm doing to my body and to my mind. So instead of fixing those, I decided that maybe the right way to do this is one hit of psychedelics would be able to open up my brain and tell me, okay, exactly what I need to do. So after a lot of back and forth, I decided that, and a lot of preparation, a lot of reading, because that's who I am. I have to make sure I'm ready for it. I woke up 6 a.m. and I was like, today I'm going to try psychedelics. I did that. I did have maybe a normal trip. It was not anything interesting, but also it wasn't anything bad. I wouldn't call it positive.
What did you take, Sam?
Magic mushrooms. It was the psilocybin mushroom. And I took, I believe, about a gram, if I'm not mistaken, of psilocybin. Well, I was tripping for about maybe a few hours. By 2 p.m., it was almost gone. Everything was colorful a little bit. That's what I noticed. But I also noticed the difference that when I got hungry around 1 or 2 p.m., when I was eating, I noticed I'm a lot more conscious of the way that my mouth tastes and the food in my mouth. I was like, that's interesting. I didn't really think much of it, but I noticed the following days that something had changed. And this is what really caused a chain of, I guess, events that is going to be followed after that. And the scary part that you mentioned, I really, really thought that I had broken something in my brain. My wife, being a nurse, she was working one night, and this is, I believe, the night of April 11th. I decided, okay, I'm just going to go get a couple of beers. It was Friday night. I get the beer, I come back, I drink, I call my wife. We have a pretty serious shouting fight over the phone. It was all caused by me not knowing that, again, I'm really going down the hill and I'm not aware of this. Wake up in the morning and I decided I'm just frustrated again. Maybe I should go to the gym. So out of the sudden, I decided to go to the gym. I go to the gym and I come back and it's around like 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And my wife had just come home. She was resting because she had worked the night before. As I'm taking a shower, a thought occurred to me. And the thought is, what if I get schizophrenia? What if I have schizophrenia and I'm not aware of it? Something that is very benign and shouldn't cause any kind of additional fear or any kind of additional scare. I felt like something chemically literally changed. I felt like something happened to me physically as I'm taking a shower. So I stopped the shower, I came out, and I felt like, oh, wow, I don't feel normal. I don't know what's happening, but something's happening and I cannot put it to words. I walked back to my wife. I woke her up and I said, hey, I don't know what's happening to me, but I don't feel good. She was like, oh, your colors changed. What's going on? I was like, I don't know. She told me, maybe you're having a heart attack. Let's go to the emergency room. This is now around 6 p.m. So we go in. As soon as you say you feel that way, they put you right in front of everyone else because they think you're maybe having a cardiac arrest or having a heart attack. They did all kinds of EKGs. They did X-rays. They ran through everything. And this is I think the start of the biggest mistake that maybe was on my side or maybe on the doctor that was the emergency room. He didn't tell me the name of this phenomenon. He just came to me and he said, I'm going to take you something that relaxes you. Don't worry, everything's good. They didn't mention that this phenomenon has a name. It's called a panic attack. So they sent me home. Around 10 p.m., I was at the emergency maybe for about 3 hours. They ran all kinds of tests. Everything's normal. Physically, everything's normal. They sent me home. On the way back home, I asked my wife, I don't know what happened to me, but what if it happens again? She was like, I don't know. I don't know what happened to you, and the result is all good. The first thing that pops in my head, it must be the psychedelics. Something's changed, and I could feel that the way that I perceive the world now is completely different. It feels different. It doesn't feel connected. We come home, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put it behind me. I'm not going to dwell with this too much. It'll go away on its own. A few days later, I'm working, and the working day is over around 5 p.m. As I'm coming down from the stairs, I see the sun setting around 5 or 6 p.m., and which marks the end of the day. The fact that it popped in my head that the day is about to end caused, again, something very negative, something so frustrating. And I don't know how to put it, but I felt like this is bad. The day is about to end. And then it caused yet another same reaction that I had felt just a few days ago. And I came down and I told my wife, the same thing that happened just 2 days ago, it's happening again. And she was like, okay, let's go out for a walk. So we went for a walk, we walked around, and I'm still not understanding what's going on to me. Why would seeing the orangey color of the sun around the end of the day would cause something like that? And this was the second time this happened. I'm totally terrified. I don't know what's going on with me. And I go and at this point I started searching, and I think that was the first mistake. So I go on to internet and I start looking at forums. I look for videos. So what happens when you take psychedelics? Is this normal? And I was like, oh, maybe it's the weed. Maybe the weed was causing this. I don't even know what's going on. And right around the same time, just to exacerbate everything else, my stomach's starting to acting up. So I woke up one night in the middle of the night and I had this painful chest pain. And I told my wife, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. She was like, okay, but you told this a few days ago too. And it wasn't a heart attack. I was like, I don't know what's going on. So she was like, maybe you're just having acid reflux. And she gave me a Pepsid, which is kind of an acid reducer. And that solved the problem. And I realized, okay, maybe all of this feelings that I'm feeling has nothing to do with anything else. Maybe it's just my stomach acting up. You're always looking for an excuse to say, okay, just to explain the situation. So I started going to different doctors. I changed 2 or 3 different doctors, GI doctors, and everyone was like, your stomach is fine. You might having a little bit too much acid reflux. You just have to take care of how much coffee you drink first thing in the morning. Every single test came back positive. So from the point that the second panic attack happened, maybe for 2 weeks period, I'm going from doctor to doctor, from GI doctor to general practitioner, trying to figure out what happened to me, hoping that this has a physiological reason that I'm experiencing some of this. And the third time is I go to the library. I thought I should start socializing. Maybe I should start going out more, not staying at home. So I go to the library to work out of a library, and right around 2 or 3 p.m. And I think now that I know about this, I feel like it has something to do with the circadian rhythm. My panic attacks would always happen right in the afternoon, maybe from 2 p.m. till 6 p.m. And the third one was when I decided to search the forums again, and I came across this forum. And someone said, oh, yeah, I have felt exactly what you're feeling. Unfortunately, 10 years later, I still have them. That caused another panic attack. I was like, oh, God, I'm ruined. My brain is ruined. I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life. And I walked out and with a complete panic attack. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I'm in the middle of the parking lot of the library. I got in my car and I drove to the nearest, I went on Yelp, found the nearest psychotherapist, or I should say psychologist. And I went in, I was like, I want to see a doctor right now. And the lady was like, it doesn't work this way, dude. Sorry, you have to get an appointment. I was like, okay, I'll get the next appointment. I was like, yeah, that's 2 months away. I can't live like this for 2 months. And this is right in the middle of pandemic. So people are experiencing all kinds of anxiety issues. And Sean, I tried everything. I contacted some of my friends who had tried psychedelics. One of them was into meditation and he had a little bit of a hippish life. So he was like, I know this lady. She knows all these different energies. You should go see her. We went in. She gave me something to shake and I was like, what am I doing? She was like, what does that make you feel? I was like, nothing really. Doesn't make me feel anything. I was like, doesn't it relax? He was like, no. And I tried everything. Nothing was working. And the last time, and I do remember, I should say, this experience that my wife and her family, we decided to go for a walk and a hike at the Hollywood Hills. And there are pictures of that day of us standing with the dogs, with her sisters and brother, taking pictures. And if you look at my face, you see this happy, relaxed person in the pictures. And that's the scary part. And when I see people that sometimes they talk about themselves, but they have a normal looking face, it always bothers me and it concerns me because I remember vividly that day. I was thinking if it wasn't because of my parents and if it wasn't because of my wife, I would jump off this hill right now because I just can't deal with this anymore. As we're walking and we're supposed to be having fun, my entire body is filled with anxiety. I can feel the anxious energy moving in my body as we're walking around. The smallest thing would just trigger me. And I was like, I'm just done. I'm done with this. This has been April, May, end of May. I've dealt with this for about 2 months now and nothing's changing and still the same. The panic attacks keep happening. I don't even know what it is. And at this point, I started realizing maybe these are psychological panic attacks. Maybe I learned a little bit. I had never heard of the term panic attack. I never experienced it. So it was all new to me. And it reminds me of Ellen DeGeneres' sidekick, Twitch. I'm not sure if you have heard his story, but he was this happy guy always jumping around and then he committed suicide 2 years ago and everyone was shocked by that. It was unbelievable. On the surface, when you would look at it, it was like, oh, this guy's full of energy. And then he just committed suicide one day. He walked into a hotel room and he killed himself. And when I was listening to your audiobook, which we get to in just a second, you mentioned that you have a lot more compassion after what happened to you with people that go through psychological disorders. I started feeling that way after I started to recover, that you should never take these lightly. And if you feel like there's someone around you that they come to you, don't take it lightly. Don't say, oh, it's nothing. You'll be fine. You need to address it. And there's always good news because no matter what it is, there's definitely a solution for it. And this trip on the hike to Hollywood Sign and coming back, it's something I would never forget. A few days, and I would quite often would wake up in the middle of the night with the complete sense of terror and panic. I don't even know why. I didn't know why I'm feeling this way until, just like you mentioned in the introduction, it was around 3 a.m. this one time that I just woke up again, feeling exactly the same, that I don't know what to do with myself. I'm ready to go into another panic attack. And I was like, let me just start looking again. Maybe I didn't use the right keywords. And I changed some of the keywords. Instead of looking for weed, panic attacks, something else I put in. I don't know what it was. And I saw your video. I was like, I'm not sure if it relates to me, but I've watched every single video. Let me watch this one too. As I started watching, I said, hey, have you felt this way? Have you felt disconnected? Have you had this existential thoughts? I was like, yes, that's me. So I was so excited that someone's mentioning some of the stuff that I'm going through. It's like, okay, so finally someone's exactly experiencing or explaining things that I'm experiencing. Oh my God, it was such a relief. And then he said, by the way, it has a name. It's called depersonalization. I was like, yes, I don't feel like a person. And I did not even wait. I immediately was like, you know what? This might be a scam. This guy might just want to take my money. I don't know, it's a few a few dollars, or I don't know, 40, 50, whatever that the cost was at the time. And I was like, I'm just going to purchase this because I have tried every other solution. I went to see a psychiatrist immediately. Oh yeah, we're just going to put you on a bunch of these inhibitors. I was like, doctor, you didn't even listen to me to see what I'm experiencing. It was like, no, what you're experiencing is anxiety. Just take the pill. It was like, I don't want to take the pill. I refuse to just take pills just because you identify this as anxiety. What if it's not anxiety? It was like, okay, it's up to you. Come back to me if you want. The guy literally spent 15 minutes listening to me, less than that, to maybe 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes, he was just sending me a bunch of prescribed pills. It's like, I just don't want to take pills. I don't think it's for me. So I bought the book, and I still remember as the book started, there's this music at the beginning of it that panicked me again because there was like, it's very spatial. I was like, why would this guy put this in the beginning? And then I was like, don't worry, I want you to stop reading the forums. I want you to just listen to this, download this, put it on your phone, put it on your computer, and listen to this as often as you can. And that's exactly what I did. So this is sometime around towards the end of May of 2021. And I had you with me, Sean, wherever I would go. I was like, okay. And I listened to that book maybe 10 times in the course of 4 or 5 days. I actually never really read the book, but I loved the audiobook. I loved the calm tone of your voice. And finally, I knew what it was. The part of the panic attacks was because I didn't know what's causing this. I didn't even know if anyone else experienced this. The unknowing, the nature of it was the biggest fear factor for me. And even if it would happen to me, even if sometimes I would have those chemical reactions that I would feel like I was okay. And then I would look at myself in the mirror. I was like, who are you? And then boom, it would happen. I don't know how that's possible, but I could feel the shift in the way that my body and my brain would feel by just a simple question of looking at myself in the mirror. And then the question was, who is this person looking in the mirror? I remember watching TV and I could watch newscaster. I was like, who's that guy? What's behind his eyes? What is he thinking? What is a human being? And then boom, it would happen again. And I listened to your book and you said, you know what? There's one thing that you said in that book that I took it to heart. And you said, if I ask you to not think about the pink elephant, that's exactly what you're going to do. So the solution is to do something else that gets your mind off of the pink elephant. And that's something that I still practice up until today. When I have negative thoughts, because people do have it, I get busy with something else. I start working. I start reading. I start working on my cars. Something that would get my mind off that thing. And then you realize the energy of it goes away and disappears. So the book was a lifesaver. I started listening to it and I started listening to it. By the way, right in the midst of all of that happening, when I started having my panic attacks, I donated every single book, spiritual book that I had. I did not want to think about them. I did not want to read. I did not want to hear the name Eckharte. I did not want to hear Ram Dass. It would panic. It would cause a huge panic attack if I heard Ram Dass. I was like, oh my God, remember all this stuff that he talked about? So I donated every single book that I had that had anything to do with the nature of reality. I love physics. I would not study physics. I would go out and look at the sky and would cause a panic in me. And the book ultimately was something that I continued to review. And I remember I contacted you and I think it was maybe I downloaded your book, I believe somewhere around June of 2021. And around August, around that time, I contacted you and I said, Sean, I'm recovering, but the anxiety is still with me. Do you think I should take medication? And you responded and you said, it's completely up to you. I'm not a doctor. You should really decide if you feel like it's necessary. You're on the right path, but whether or not you want to take medication is up to you. And I decided to go the herbal way of something that you mentioned in your book. And I think that was the John Wort, if I'm not mistaken. St.
John's Wort, yes.
St. John's Wort, yeah. And I did go on that. I would take, I believe, based on the description on the bottle, it would say take 3 of them, 1 in the morning, 1 afternoon, 1 evening. And it did help significantly. And then I was on that herbal medication for about maybe 6 months. And then I started to wean off slowly towards beginning of 2022. And that definitely helped. The other thing that I contacted you with in terms of issues is right in the midst of all of this happening, my boss came to me and he said, I want you to run, as we discussed, I want you to run the engineering team. I'm promoting you. And I said, no, I don't think I can handle it. Even the thought of it would cause anxiety in me. And I contacted him and I said, Sean, do you think I feel like this job is going to be full of stress? Should I do this or not? And he said, do everything without thinking about the anxiety. And I think that was a great advice. And I'm glad that I listened to that advice because I did it. And 4 years later, I'm still doing the same job. It's full of stress, but it's nothing that should cause panic attacks. Panic attacks were not being caused just by my job, by the nature of my job. It was a culmination of different things and bad lifestyle that I had. And it was like one chapter after another. So the initial existential thoughts started to go away. Then it was like, oh, my job is stressful. My job is causing all of this. I was looking for excuses. And then you told me, you don't need to worry about it. Make your decisions without the thought of anxiety. And that was in the past. And then something else popped up. I would wake up in the morning and I had no desire to work. I was like, so what? I work, we all die. So what's the point? And I reached out to you and I said again, Sean, sorry again, but I have this. It was like, go read this article and this article. I've mentioned all of this. This is all normal. This is existential thought. It's not normal. Knowing that it's not normal, I think it's the most important thing. A lot of the time we associate that, we say, because it does make sense in a lot of ways. It does make sense. I'm sorry for this getting a little morbid at this time, because the next one that I had to deal with for maybe a few months was the thought of dying. And yes, as you said in your book, we all know that at some point we're going to die. It shouldn't cause a panic attack. It shouldn't be something that, you think about day in, day out. If you're doing that, there's something else at play. And maybe this last one took me a while to get over. But then as I started to recover and I started to get better and better, it all went away. I was excited to wake up in the morning and go to work, even though my work was challenging. The thought of, okay, we know we're all going to die. That's okay. And it's part of life. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe after we die, life gets better. We don't know that. Why would you be fearful of it? And it all got a lot better. And ultimately, I probably shouldn't say this, but I think what I was looking for back in 2014, 15, 16 started to become a lot more of a reality for me. Because if you're scared of a ridiculous, empty, meaningless, fictitious thought that scares you and causes a panic attack, like the sky, or looking at yourself in the mirror, then you realize the empty and fictitious nature of thoughts. And then you realize it's like it opens up a Pandora box in a maybe positive way, that if this thought, because I was very anxious and this thought was ridiculous, I'm a lot less anxious. And I think this thought also is very valid. How do I know it's valid? So you start questioning thoughts and you start questioning things that might seem very real and very important in nature. And then the more you think about it, the more you realize this is no different than thinking, oh, who am I? Or where did humans come from? It's the same. These are all valid questions, but it shouldn't be something that completely consumes you and consumes your brain. And that caused the separation between me and the thoughts. And every time a thought would come in, I was like, even though it seemed, oh, maybe I lose my job. A good example of it is just the thought. It doesn't exist. It's not reality. And I slowly started to feel more and more separated from my thoughts. And the more you feel separate, because thoughts ruin our days. When you wake up and you have all these negative thoughts, it ruins your mood. And we don't normally realize that. And that really caused that separation to start happening for me. And eventually, maybe, I can't say I'm enlightened. I don't even know what that means today. And I don't think it matters. But I started living a lot more happier, knowing that thoughts, I can't take my thoughts seriously. The same way that a ridiculous thought caused a panic attack, the same thought could cause me to have a bad day. And I just don't want to give it any energy. And I still practice the pink elephant example. If a thought is negative and it's very persistent, I don't think about it. I don't sit down on my couch and dwell with it. I just do something else. I start maybe reading a book, as I mentioned. Maybe I did this Instagram example was a fantastic way of distracting yourself. I don't recommend using a lot and consuming a lot of Instagram content as you recover later on. But at that point, it's better than having existential thoughts. So I would pop up my Instagram. I was like looking at all the cat and dog videos. I would just get me distracted and remove that energy of negative energy that I was experiencing, because it would show itself in different ways. And it was so important to identify that, oh, this is the same symptom. It's just showing up as it in a different way. And once I would know that, I was like, oh, this is just my DP showing up in a different way. Then I could just dismiss it. I could just distract myself every time it would come up. And ultimately, I think helped me to relax and not take life so seriously. Thank you for listening to that, Sean. Sorry for a long story.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for going through your experience in such detail. Sam, that was fascinating to listen to. First of all, I'm delighted that you're through that. You're doing as well as you're doing. Couple of things. First, I read I read Be Here Now when I was in India as well.
Wow.
I can't remember where I got a copy of it from. I think it was just in a hostel in northern India or something. But I remember reading it, and yeah, it really blew my mind. I was, but this was long after I had recovered from DPDR. But yeah, it's almost like, you know, the idea of koans, like these short little poems or kind of riddles that don't have a solution, but the idea is to kind of to get the mind to stop focusing on what's happening around you.
Right.
And the book feels kind of like that. It's full of these little kind of mysteries and things that can't be pulled apart, but it kind of tricks the mind, not tricks the mind, but trains the mind into focusing on these things.
Sure.
His the Ram Dass stuff is really, really wonderful. But I know exactly what you mean about the stuff of like Ram Dass and like Eckharte Tolle. And I mean, for me, when I had my experience with DPDR, I had been reading not particularly that stuff, maybe the Tolle stuff I had, but I was reading a lot of stuff by psychedelic authors, like Terence McKenna, Graham Morrison, Robert Ann Thomas, and Timothy Leary, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And it's really, really fascinating. But what I think can sometimes happen, or what in retrospect certainly happened for me, was the way that, like, for most people who take drugs, it's mainly just like for a party. It's mainly, it's just, well, I'm going out for the night, so or I'm at a music festival, so I'll take mushrooms or whatever. And then, but in a way, that's the experience that you expect from it. And even if it goes slightly bad, you just kind of think, well, sure, it's just mushrooms, or it's just a drug. But when you've been consuming that type of literature and information, right, you almost kind of give it more of a weight that if it starts to go wrong, you can start to imply some sort of kind of existential test to it, or a threat, and then especially afterwards, if you have a subsequent panic attack or anxiety gets triggered, then you will very often make the connection between that and the drug and some sort of spiritual existential test, and then it turns into this massive elaborate narrative construction. That's certainly what it was for me at the time. I mean, I thought, I thought I had dabbled with forces I couldn't possibly comprehend. Like I'd opened a door that I couldn't close, and that I was now going to be a drug casualty because I smoked weed in Amsterdam that was way too strong for me, and I was an idiot for having done it. I would pay the price for the rest of my life. And part of recovery is taking that narrative off of it, that narrative scaffolding away from it, and just saying, no,
great way.
It's just anxiety. It really doesn't feel like that when you're going through it, but it never does. I mean, it's not like when anyone has a panic attack, they think to themselves, it's just anxiety. Like you think, oh no, I'm going to die, I'm going to go crazy, etc., etc. It's very interesting as well, Sam, what you mentioned about when you had the first worry about the heart attack and going to the doctor, and the doctor not explaining what it was, that it was just a panic attack. It's such an interesting example because it demonstrates how important it is to have the understanding of what these symptoms are, these conditions are, because it's the lack of understanding that empowers the conditions. There's a phrase that says anxiety is caused by the fear of anxiety. Panic attacks are caused by the fear of panic attacks. Depersonalization is caused by the fear of depersonalization. Well, I've added the last two onto it. But if you don't have an understanding, if it's not explained to you what this is, or you don't figure it out, then you just go back out into the world thinking that there's some missing piece of the puzzle here. And not just that, but like, well, I mean, I may feel calm now, but like, I'm at the mercy of this for the rest of my life, because this could happen tomorrow. It could happen in 6 months' time. It could go on for 6 months. I have no idea. This is just a lottery. This is just roulette now. I mean, I have no idea what's going on. And that's terrifying. Exactly. And that's kind of like, then you're monitoring for it. And in monitoring for it, you're more likely to trigger the anxiety and then focus on the anxiety, and then off it goes again. So it's so, I think this is one of the reasons why DPDR can feel so like deeply frustrating when we get it first, is because if your anxiety manifested as a different type of anxiety-based condition, which just like DPDR is temporary and harmless, but if it's something like claustrophobia or agoraphobia, then because of the environmental specificity of it, you can, even if you've never heard of it before, if you describe it, it is easily diagnosable, and then you may not get it treated immediately, but you're at least pointed in the right direction. And just knowing that starts to drain the power away from the condition. But when you don't have that, you're just put back into the pinball machine, and you're just like, well, now I just keep getting rattled around, and I have no idea what's going on.
Exactly.
When you said as well, Sam, the thing about, when you said you were in the shower and you said, I felt like something happened to me. I felt like something physical or mental happened in that moment, That's a really good way of describing it. But one of the things that it's such a common description of anxiety, especially a panic attack, is that like I was in the middle of doing something else, and then bang, it happened. Like the symptoms hit me. And because a panic attack can feel so sudden, and it can feel so just like it goes like a binary thing. It just goes from 0 to 1. The switch, and it literally feels like a switch has been flicked in your brain, and now you're thinking differently, and you're seeing reality differently. And my God, how did this happen? How do I get out of it? And that idea of feeling like it is a switch that has been flicked is something that in the recovery process also has to be deconstructed, has to be argued with and
addressed.
Addressed, exactly. Because what we attempt to do without the correct information is we try to turn off the switch, right? So we think, for me, it was like, okay, I'm finding all of this. This was 2005, so I'm finding all of this like fragmented information on like anxiety forums and like one DPDR forum, and saying, okay, I'm going to put this together, and I'm going to try this approach to it, and I'm going to try that this evening, and I'll wake up tomorrow morning and I'll check to see that flick the switch into the off position, and it doesn't, because of course it doesn't, because you're checking on it. And then you just do that over and over and over and over again. You're trying different techniques, different combinations of techniques, different combinations of strategies, and then checking to see, did that flick the switch?
Right.
So what we do in recovery is we understand that it's the checking to see if the switch is on or off that's causing this to persist, because there is no switch. You're changing a habit of behavior. It's like if you were trying to if you had a song stuck in your head, and you resolved to make sure that every morning you would wake up and check to see
and listen to it again.
Right. So I wake up at 7 in the morning, first thing, right? Is that song still in my head or not? Like,
in my head, right?
Right. Yeah. It's the checking that keeps the song there.
Yeah.
With what we do is like, okay, but instead you get up and put on other music, and just start your day. And then that gives your brain the permission to let it go. But when you're going through it, that is in the context of anxiety, that feels deeply counterintuitive, because what you're thinking is like, well, if I'm not checking it, am I giving up? Have I thrown away the idea of recovery? Because surely what I need to do here is to keep unpacking this and investigating it and tinkering with it until something clicks into place and it changes. But it's not. It's the constant investigation with just like with the pink elephants. It's the constant investigation and poking at it. Because when you're doing this, when you're saying, I'm frustrated with this, how do I stop this? I will do anything to get rid of this. I need to, all that your brain sees is this. You're pointing at it. You're just pointing at it. And all your brain says is it's important, it's important, it's important, it's important, it's important. And then you go through your day wondering why you can't stop thinking about it when all you're doing is focusing your brain's attention at it.
Right.
The sunset,
I mentioned one
Sam,
thing.
please.
Sorry, because you mentioned this, and I think this is a great opportunity for me to mention this, because I was explaining this to my wife, and I said, when you get a scar, when you get a cut, you see it. First of all, this is not normal. When you get a cut in your brain, in your psyche, you don't know that's not normal. And we think this is the right way to think. That makes it even more difficult. But then when you get a scar, or not a scar, when you get a cut, what do? You put a Band-Aid on it, you leave it alone. You don't try to remove the scab every single day, because if you continue to poke at it, it never recovers. If you have a cut in your psychological system, you don't keep going at it and keep poking at it, because this is not normal. And I think the portion that helped me was to identify this as I have a cut in my psyche, and that's normal. I should just let it heal and get better and not poke at it every single morning. And as you mentioned, I feel like, okay, I had a lot of morbid thoughts yesterday. Let me first thing in the morning, am I feeling better? Am I feeling more anxious? Do I have the same thoughts? Because I just removed the scab. It was trying to heal, but I didn't allow it to, because I just scraped off the scab again, and it's going to happen again. It becomes a habit. Once it becomes a habit, recovery becomes a lot more challenging. And that's something that you mentioned. The second thing you mentioned in your book was, even if a panic attack does happen, it's not the end of the world. And I was like, I'm just going to continue my life. I don't care if a panic attack happens. Even if I'm driving, I just pull over, maybe just open up my Instagram and start scrolling through my Instagram. That really took the pressure off. And I think a couple of those pointers in your book, they were just jewels. One of them was, panic attack doesn't kill you. It doesn't cause any kind of physiological harm. And just go on with your life. Even if it does happen, if you're playing the piano, if you're not playing the piano, once it happens, go start practicing the piano, because that gets your mind off your panic attack. So I totally agree with that. Sorry for interrupting you.
Not at all. Not at all. That's a really good point. That the scab thing is very good. Or it's the idea of like, if you get an injury on your arm, you don't like then spend the next week going like, is it gone? Is
my God,
it's
better. Let me just scrape it and see what happens. Is it still bleeding? Right? You leave it alone so it heals. The same thing with when you have an injury in your psyche, or psychological system, you just leave it alone until it heals. Yeah.
This is why, I mean, any cognitive behavioral therapist or anxiety specialist, any medical specialist will say, for anybody struggling with an anxiety-based condition, like the first thing is like, okay, get off the forums. Like you have to stop scratching this itch. You have to stop picking at that scab. You have to, and it's non-negotiable. And it feels so weird to do it. It feels so weird, especially when you've invested so much in these things. And also at the start, like when you come across these forums, like they are fantastic. They are fantastic because for me, was just like, as you mentioned earlier, Sam, just like, oh my God, this thing I've been experiencing has a name, because none of the doctors I'd seen were ever said the word depersonalization. And then I found it on a forum and I was like, oh my God, this is it. Thank the risen Lord, and then like 15 minutes later, you're looking at the comment that says, I've had this for 10 years, I've had this for 15 years, and you're going, oh my good God, I wish I hadn't seen this. Like, yeah, it's very, very, very frightening. The thing you mentioned as well about the sunset, Sam, was so pertinent to my own experience as well. It really rang a bell. I had an experience, I've talked about this before in other interviews, but it was not long after I first developed the condition, and I went for a walk on a beach in Kerry in the south of Ireland with my mom and my sister and her friend, and the sun was setting, and I was looking at the sunset, just having like an absolute like belter of a panic attack, just like crippling, the sunset, like. And remember thinking to myself, like, this isn't even a vaguely stressful situation. Like, I'm on the beach in Kerry.
If anything, normally it's very romantic and it's beautiful, and people sit down, set out chairs and watch the sunset. It should be nice and relaxing.
It's a relaxing wonder of nature. It should be absolutely joyous and beautiful and calm and quiet. And I'm just like, I think I'm literally going to fall over because I feel so absolutely petrified of it. And then you think to yourself, like, well, if I can't look at a sunset, like, how in the name of God am I going to like have a career or be social, travel? Forget it. Like, I know, and I felt like it's all gone. Like, it's all gone. Everything's gone. I can't, like, I'm going to have to be in a darkened room for the rest of my life. Maybe I'll be able to watch television, maybe, like, but that's it. It's gone. And then you think of like what recovery feels like climbing 100 Mount Everests, because you have to go from being petrified of a sunset to trying to get back to being a normal human being where you're social and traveling and such. And it feels like it's 100 Everests away. But in fact, it's right beside you. It's right there. It doesn't feel like that, but it's right beside you. And it's not that all of these, like the systems of like your ability to enjoy a sunset has been damaged. It hasn't. It's just the way your fight or flight system is switched on. It is difficult to enjoy a sunset when your brain is essentially saying, but you're in danger. Are you sure you're not in danger? Are you sure there isn't a wild animal behind you somewhere? Like that sunset's nice and everything, but like there might be a bear behind you. So let's hit all those alarm systems, but when there is no bear there, there's no physical danger happening. You feel that fear becomes inverted, and you start to think, well, if there's no physical stressor, maybe the stressor is me, and maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I've got some spiritual crisis or some existential threat, and then off it goes into the big narrative scaffolding again. And also, looking at photos. This was the thing as well that like I remember like going to like gigs and stuff with like friends of mine, and like being like I could barely function. I was so anxious, and then I'd look at like photos after I recovered, and I'm like, because the gulf between what you're experiencing, how bad you think it is, and then, I mean, most people I spoke to at the time, I mean, my parents knew, and like my sisters, but I mean, if I met a stranger, or if I met someone, in a social setting, like that person, I'm certain never walked away from a conversation thinking that guy seemed really anxious, because you can, and in my head, I'm barely able to maintain a conversation. But for the person, like the distant, I remember like walking.
They would say, "What a wonderful, calm, and sweet guy." That's the way they saw it.
Well,
right?
that guy he seemed really calm.
It's very calm.
He looks like
while we were like
enjoys
about
a
to
good
burst
sunset.
inside. Absolutely.
I remember like walking past shop windows and seeing my reflection and being shocked at how calm I looked, because I didn't feel that way at all. But and also just the last thing that I mentioned, Sam, just out of the stuff you've said, the thing of these certain thoughts making sense, like the idea of that really frightened me, was like For me, an existential thought that absolutely floored me was the size of the universe. I would think about the size of the universe, and I would just be, it felt like a ton of bricks falling on top of me. Like my stomach would churn. I would tense up. I would just be like paralyzed, just thinking, geez, the size of the universe. Like that's, and what completely freaked me out was the thought that even if I can recover from DPDR, which at the time I was like, there's not a hope, but even if I do, like the size of the universe is still the size of the universe. So like that ton of bricks is always going to fall on me, even if I recover. But the thing is that that's like saying, I hope I can recover from this flu, but what happens if I never stop sneezing for the rest of my life? That's not recovery. What I realized during recovery was, it's not about whether the thought has any truth to it or not. That's irrelevant. It's about the levels of anxiety that you're experiencing when you have the thought. That's all. Because the size of the universe terrified me, but also like the mouse of this computer would have terrified me. This flask of water would have terrified me. Trees terrified me at one point. The sky terrified me. My reflection terrified me. Everything did, you know. What's the through line in all of what's the connection between like this computer, this mouse, and the size of the universe? The connective tissue is anxiety, because there's no logic there. It's just anxiety saying, this is terrifying, this is terrifying, this is terrifying. And the fact that like some thoughts, the thought of like, oh, what if I'm in a dream and I can't wake up, doesn't make a scratch of sense. The size of the universe, that's a real thing, but it's irrelevant whether it's a real thing or not. It's the anxiety that you need to address, and the worry that it having some truth to it makes it more difficult to overcome is a massive overcomplication, and it's just anxiety prolonging itself needlessly. Yeah.
100%. I mean, my example was the nature of my job. It is stressful, but today it doesn't cause a panic attack in me. Back in 2021, I would wake up multiple times in the middle of the night having panic attacks just because of my job. Then I realized it is a stressful job. Every job actually is stressful, but it shouldn't cause. Most people go through this. If I'm having panic attacks, then Jeff Bezos should be, every 5 minutes you should be having a panic attack. It just doesn't. Then you realize the phony and empty nature of some of these thoughts, and you realize, okay, this is all caused by the state of anxiousness that I'm in. Once I recover, hopefully these will go away. And as you mentioned, the sneezing goes away. One thing that that I experienced, Sean, I'm not sure if you experienced it, is I felt like there was I remember that I had almost recovered maybe a year later, but thinking about very sensitive topics, including maybe thinking about psychedelics, I feel like there's part of my brain, there's a black hole that would open up again. And I had to just control it. And slowly, as I learned that this is just probably another symptom of it, but there was like a state of mind that is so bizarre and so strange. And I understand some people when they say, don't mess with psychedelics if you're worried about some of these side effects. It was only when I had certain thoughts about maybe some of the unnatural states or the states of consciousness that we're not aware of, I would feel that part of my brain getting activated again, and I would immediately pull myself back because I had trained my brain to be so good at this to catch myself before going there. Obviously, after maybe a year afterwards, I can talk about psychedelics right now. I can talk about any kind of psychosis, and it just doesn't trigger the same effect. But did you feel and experience any of that? That you feel like there's something in your brain that gets triggered. It's like a black hole that gets triggered, and it's so unknown to you that feels bizarre and scary.
Yeah. And there was, I mean, and for me, there was certain topics that felt so triggering that I would have to completely avoid them, and they would open up that black hole, and I'd have to start trying to get away from the event horizon, you know. And you know, an example I always give, but it was the film The Matrix, the first one. I absolutely adore every frame of that movie. I think it's a masterpiece. And when I had DPDR, I couldn't, if someone mentioned the film to me, because it's about,
Realities.
different realities and being plugged into a fake reality. If someone mentioned the film to me, if I overheard someone talking about that film, it was 2005, like, so people, it was 6 years after it came out, so people were still, and the sequels had come out too, so people were still talking about it, and you see posters for it and like DVDs everywhere. Everyone had a copy of that film. Everyone my age had a copy of that film, and I would see it, and it would just like set me off. I would start thinking about it, and I thought, am I going to have to spend the rest of my life avoiding this? And again, it's a great example because, like, when I recovered, I went back to just adoring the film. And at any point in that process, did the film change? No, the movie is still the movie the whole way through. Not a frame of that film changed while I loved it and then was terrified of it and loved it again. What changed was my levels of anxiety went up and then down. And that's all that happened. And then when you think about it in that kind of practical sense, which is a part of recovery, you get a better sense of what that black hole was. It was just another interpretation of a relatively simple process, which was your fight or flight response or anxiety.
Yeah, same. And I bought all the books that I donated. I rebought by
Did
every
you?
single book that I do.
Nice.
And I listened to Eckharte. He has this. I've listened to multiple podcasts from Eckharte, and he has this podcast that is on Spotify and everyone else, and all the other platforms that they have the podcasts. And they're normally presented by Oprah. So Oprah opens it up, and then there are chunks of his talks at different locations, and he's coming to Los Angeles next year in April. So I already pre-purchased a ticket because I saw him in 2022, and I'm planning on seeing him again because I can now resonate a lot more with what he says, because I realized the empty, fictitious nature of thoughts. And that's all he says. He says, hey, thoughts are just thoughts. You don't need to think. If they're useless, then why would you want to think thoughts, right? You just put them aside and life becomes a lot happier.
Yeah. And it feels very strange to do it when the thought feels like an emergency, when the thought feels like there's something so compelling as like, oh my God, the size of the universe, or like, what is the nature of consciousness or something. And it feels really weird to just go like, no, I'm not doing that. It feels very, very strange to do it. But this is, and also there's this idea that like, oh, like that's just, you're just distracting yourself from the thoughts. But I mean, distraction or reframing thought and refocusing attention is like one of the core tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy, and there are decades of clinical research behind this. But essentially, it is tied to the same thing of just saying, okay, well, the value that a thought has is given to the thought by you by the degree of attention that you give to it. Like a thought that says the size of the universe will terrify you forever has the same weight as, I wonder if I'll have pancakes for breakfast tomorrow morning. That is to say that neither of them have any intrinsic weight. They're just thoughts. They're just words. They're just thoughts. That's all. But when we go focus on that one, we point the spotlight at it, and we just keep thinking about it and researching it, then the thought gathers momentum and the brain just categorizes it as being important. But when you just like take your attention and go, no, we're doing this instead, that gives your brain the non-verbal permission to categorize that thought as not being important. And we do that over and over again, and when we train ourselves away from one habit of thought into another. The thing is that like as with the pink elephants thing, it feels so counterintuitive to do it. It feels at the start it feels like an insult. I mean, I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, I mean, hang on, I'm having thoughts about the size of the universe. I'm having thoughts about like literally the nature of consciousness, and you're telling me to
not think about it.
To not think about it, to simply focus away.
Isn't
You
that
can't
the
do
only
that.
thing we should be thinking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it just shows that how much energy and how much emphasis we give to a thought really defines how we feel and how we live our lives. And as you mentioned, it's very counterintuitive. But for me, it wasn't because you laid it out so clearly. I was like, I don't know. I need to know how this works. This guy has figured it out, and I'm just gonna follow it. And I really want to help myself. I'm one of those individuals when I know there's a solution, I'll follow it to the Z, and that's exactly what I did. And I was so good at it immediately when one of these existential thoughts would come in. I got so good at it within milliseconds. I could be aware of it, and I was pulling up my phone to open up my Instagram or do something else. And I think that really expedited my recovery significantly because I was like, I want to get better. And what Sean is saying in this book, I've done it for 2 weeks and I've seen great improvement. And I'm just going to follow through with it. And that gave me more energy. I remember the instance that you mentioned in terms of the immediate change that you feel after a panic attack. Something I remember this day very vividly because my sister-in-law came in to wash her car and I offered to help her in our garage. And I said, hey, let me just go upstairs and grab this thing and come back. So I came inside the house. As I'm walking by our sink, toilet sink, I see myself in the mirror and immediately cause a panic attack because like, who is this guy? And it completely that chemical change, again, it happened, but it didn't have the same effect because I knew, okay, this is just, it's gonna go away. It doesn't matter. I know I'm recovering. I know this is just a side effect of the DP. So it would not completely take over me. It wouldn't affect me the way that it used to affect me because I know that it hasn't recovered yet. I can still see the scar. I still haven't recovered, but I knew I was on the right path for recovery. So for me, it was a lot easier. And again, really, as I've mentioned this a few times too, because of the way that you um, emphasize on the path of recovery, and you kind of articulated it that, hey, don't worry. I remember I would go into the jacuzzi because that's what I want to, that's the thing that would calm me down. When I would go into the jacuzzi would really help me. And I remember you would say you would be able to go back to the way you were 100%, even probably better than you felt before you experienced DP. I was like, yes. So I'm just going to see, I can't wait for me to have this next beer again because I did not touch alcohol for that entire time when I was recovering. I followed everything again to the T, as you mentioned in the book. I stopped drinking. I started working out. I was socializing. I was making sure that every day I called someone and I go out and have time to meet with people and literally follow through with everything. And that was the right recipe for recovery. So hopefully anyone who's listening to this, they would be able to recover as quickly by just making sure that they help themselves by taking those steps.
Yeah, that's great that you're able to make that progress as quickly as you did, Sam. Yeah, and you know, recovery is again, it's recovery is it's moving away from the idea of like the on off switch. It's like you know, it's I'm not trying to check to see it's a switch on and off. It's like saying, okay, I'm changing a habit of behavior, thought and behavior. It will take a bit of time, it take a bit of discipline, it take a bit of patience, but it works. It will work. It works every time. What not to expect, is that you do these things and that you wake up 24 hours later and everything's back to normal, right? Now you'll get there, but it's not going to happen that quickly. But what you will see are small incremental improvements building up over time. That's what to expect. So when you just like give yourself the space to have that happen, as opposed to checking the on-off switch over and over and over again, you relinquish so much of that pressure upon yourself.
Yeah.
And you kind of relax a bit and you just start to see these incremental changes happen, but they happen while you're doing other things. Just to run back a little bit, Sam, and maybe you mentioned something like this already. Apologies if I'm asking a question you've already answered, but What was your lowest point in the whole experience? Is there a particular time or event that sticks with you when you look back on it?
The one that I remember is the hike to the Hollywood sign, because that's the point that I feel like if life is going to be like this, it's just not worth living. Life that you said, it's a roll of a dice. I don't know when the next panic attack is going to happen. I don't even know what I'm feeling. And I would sit down and search for things. I even ended up like thinking I do have some sort of a parasite in my guts that is causing all of this. I went down that far. I was like looking into the forum, and someone said, so here it is, the most bizarre things, because people want to come up with some sort of a reason for why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So I found this forum one time, right around the same time that I was experiencing this extreme levels of anxiety, that, oh, this is probably has something to do with your gut health. And sometimes you end up having this bacteria or parasite in your gut, and that prevents serotonin being produced in your system, and that causes all kinds of anxiety issues. I was like, oh, how do I tell the doctor to check for parasite in my gut? Maybe it's my large intestine has some sort of parasite. And I would tell this to the doctor, and the doctor would just look at him and was like, this guy has lost it, because they knew that probably this is all just bad life habits and something that I might have gone through, maybe some sort of PTSD that I'm not mentioning. But they thought I was just losing it and I'm going crazy. But I think that was the point. Just a few weeks before I came across your first video, and at that point, I was just shooting in the dark. Saying I'll just go through life for the rest of my life, and this is my life now. Every time, as you mentioned, I see the sunset, I'm just going to have a panic attack. I look at the sky, I'm going to have a panic attack. I think about work, I'm going to have a panic attack. I don't even know when it happens. And the worst thing that I did around that time is I actually had a point that I think I had a note that I wanted to mention this, because I think this is a bad habit, or this is a bad thing to do. I downloaded this app that would allow me to track my mood on a daily basis. And if it was good, it would be a happy green face. If it was okay, it was like a yellow, like straight face. And it was bad, it was like an angry red face. And then I would pull it up and say, oh my goodness, the past 2 weeks, it's been like red, 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 yellow, red, 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 yellow. It's like, this is my life now. And once, maybe in a month, I would wake, I was like, oh, I feel normal. I would check the switch in the morning. I was like, I feel normal today. I was like, I would tell my wife, babe, I'm recovered. I'm good. And then boom, the next day I would wake up, it's back. I was like, what just happened? I thought I'm recovered. Not knowing that that's how anxiety works. It fluctuates. It goes up and down. And the point is, throw away. So when I read your book, obviously the first thing I did, I deleted that app. I was like, I don't need to track this. When I feel good, I feel good. I'm not going to be celebrating it. And when I feel bad and crappy, that's just how it is. And I just go through my day without noticing it, or just giving too much energy to it.
Absolutely. That's very interesting with the gut parasite explanation. I had so many of those types of explanations as well, that I went through every possible permutation trying to find an explanation of what this could be. But what each of them had in common was that it was something outside of me. Even in so much as a gut parasite can be outside of you, but it was something that was like that somebody else could fix. I just had to find out what it is, bring it to the correct professional, and they would zap it, and that would fix me. And I'd wake up the next day and it was gone. So
an injection and boom, an injection of happy juice and you're good to go.
Yeah, this is it. And again, it's the same thing essentially as having the on-off switch. If that on-off switch is a gut parasite, well, okay, then I just take the gut parasite out of me, and then it goes into the anxiety, goes into the off position.
Oh, switch. Yeah.
It has to be that. It has to be binary. There has to be something specific causing this. And that's why it feels initially so strange for it to be based on, that's why it feels so strange to understand that it is actually your own habits and behavior that require changing, and that why that obviously doesn't have the immediacy of addressing something like a gut parasite. It is, in many ways, it's actually easier because it is completely within your control. So it's just a shift in how you think about it, but it's essential, and again, it works every time. Sam, um, what did recovery feel like for you? You know, when you started to see improvements, was it how did those manifest? So you went and you took that job, that kind of higher pressure job. I presume that was a big part of it. But how did you notice the symptoms changing and shifting over time?
That's a great question. I think it's just the frequency of having those existential thoughts. And as I mentioned, I felt like it was like one challenge at a time. So one issue that I had to resolve was not to look at myself in the mirror and panic. So that got solved. And I was like, I have fully recovered. The next thing would pop up. Oh, your job is very stressful. How are you going to deal with this? I was like, this is not a normal question. This is, again, DP manifesting itself, has a different mask on. I was like, I'm just going to deal with this with just not giving it any thought. Every time this thought comes to mind, pink elephant, I'm going to look at my Instagram. That went away. And I was like, why would you want? I remember one morning waking up and looking at LinkedIn and seeing all people, oh, I just got this job. And I looked at it, I was like, why would we do any kind of job? We're all going to die. What's the point of all of this? And I was like, okay, this is just yet another one. It's another manifestation of the same thing because, yeah, true. Some people decide to work hard. Some people decide to work slightly less hard. And we all get there and eventually we all live this world. That's perfectly normal. Thinking that way about it wasn't normal. So I was like, this is another one. So I was like, it's like me in a boxing challenge. You would throw one punch at me, I would have to throw one punch back. And then the last one that I mentioned that took a much longer time was, you're all going to die. And this is a huge fear. We don't know what's going to happen. And it's true. And that's what, as you mentioned, it's the difficult part of dealing with DP, because the questions, initially, some of them, like sunset, shouldn't scare you. But then the next one feels a lot more real, feels like a much more existential and consequential question that you have to think about. I have to solve this. It's like, I can't. And I listened to that portion of your audiobook, and it's just that everyone, once in a while, they mull over the idea of leaving this world. It's normal. Shouldn't cause a panic attack. Shouldn't scare you. It's slightly scary because we don't know what's going to happen, but it's nothing that should be a huge issue that you spend every single day of your life thinking about this. So I think I could see the questions becoming more sensible, the issues becoming more sensible, because they were not about a sunset or who's looking at me in the mirror, but they were becoming something that was a lot more mundane maybe, and something that everyone deals with. But my response wasn't justified to some of those questions. My heightened response wasn't justified that, yes, everyone's once in a while, they hate their job, unfortunately. It shouldn't be the first thing that you wake up and say, oh, my God, I'm feeling so much anxiety. And sometimes I would feel complete feeling of, I don't want to do this anymore. It's so horrible. Even though reality is a lot of people would want to have my job, if you look at it realistically. And then the last one was just the idea of our own mortality, and thinking about it was like, how do I deal with this one? Because this one's valid. And I remember I sent you an email, as I mentioned, and you said, remember, this is just DP again, coming back in a different way. It's a valid question. You should think about it once in a while because it's normal, but it shouldn't be something that you dwell in every single day and every single hour of your life. And it shouldn't cause significant amount of fear because it's just not a normal reaction. And it took me a while, but I think that just kind of went away. And I got really good at identifying it. I think the hard part, anyone who's going through this, I would say be very meticulous and also be very conscious of how DP presents itself. in different forms because it changes. It's like it morphs into something else, and it comes back and says, "Look at me! I'm another existential important question and or issue that you have to address." You just don't have to address it because no one can address the idea of mortality. You just have to let it go, and it becomes normal, and it's something that is part of our lives, and we are okay with it. Most people are okay with it, and it gets better. So for me, it was once in a while I would check the switch, but it wasn't something that I would do first thing in the morning. It was like, oh, I would even surprise myself that I do check the switch, and it feels normal. It doesn't cause any stress in me. I don't even care at that point to think about the switch because it doesn't change the way I live my life anyways. So why would I even want to check the switch? And I think at that point I realized I think I've recovered. I can talk about psychedelics. I can look at the sky and enjoy it. I can listen to Eckharte Tolle. I can read the psychedelic experiment and understanding how if something happens to help someone. And I think those are good signs to know that I've kind of fully recovered.
Yeah, certainly. I did an interview maybe earlier this year where someone described the same process as you were just speaking about, Sam, of how the thoughts kind of change over time, and they each feel frightening initially, and the interviewee described it as it's a gremlin trying on different t-shirts. Just like, okay, exactly. Put on a really striking one and be like, well, how about this one? How about this one? And you go, whoa. And you go, actually, no, it's whatever. And then they put on a sparkly t-shirt and then, how about this one? And you just go, oh yeah, no, you're grand.
Absolutely.
You know? But that's ultimately all it is. It's just anxiety trying to get your attention. It's trying to get you back into the boxing ring. It's just saying like, no. Like this needs to be a battle. And you train yourself, and in recovery, you say, I don't need to be battling you at all. You're a defensive mechanism. This isn't. This
you have to be very diligent. Yeah, you have to be very diligent to make sure that you identify. I think identifying DP, because as you said, it's a shapeshifter. It comes in a different shape or a different blouse and tries to trick you. So you just, this is DP again. I just need to dismiss it because it doesn't make it.
Yeah, certainly. And it feels, the thoughts feel so compelling. And often what also happens during recovery is at the start of the condition, the symptoms of anxiety can feel quite monolithic, and they can feel so kind of primal and overwhelming. It's just like this abject kind of visceral terror. And then as your recovery continues, you start to get your life back on track. And you're like, okay, I think I can work again. I think I can, start socializing again. I think that's when the anxiety invariably starts to become comments and commentaries and suggestions and hot takes about the condition itself. So like, okay, we're making progress, but I don't know, I think that yours might be a bit different. Like, are you 100% sure? No, because and now you've got this specific visual symptom, and that's a new one. No, and you haven't read about that in any forum. So what if it's different now? And you're there going, actually, that's a good point. Like, I didn't have this specific visual symptom before. And then but now you're back in the boxing ring. Now you're just back in an argument with anxiety. But it's just, as you said, Sam, it's just being vigilant. It's just saying, no, I know what this is. This isn't like an interesting comment about anxiety. It is anxiety. It's anxiety just trying to change his t-shirt and go like, how about this? How about this? How about this? Something I wanted to ask you as well, Sam, is in particular, like you're clearly an intelligent man, and being a software engineer, working in that kind of mindset, I presume you've got like a mindset that's very attuned to problem solving, and especially like if we're with anxiety, as we were saying earlier, that what we're doing is we're training ourselves away from thinking of it in binary terms. And as you said, that like with recovery, what you do is you train yourself to understand that it is ups and downs. it's not an on or off switch. It's ups and downs. It changes over time, and you have to kind of surrender to that a little bit and allow the variability to be in there. But from your point of view, like, because you are literally working with systems that are based on binary, and and
Good point.
and from the I mean, I barely did a bit of coding in Java and HTML back in the day.
Yes.
But that type of kind of very mathematical problem solving, did you have to try and kind of like turn down the volume on that in order to address the DPDR, or was it the opposite? Were you able to bring a more kind of linear approach to your recovery because of it?
That's a great question, Sean. That's an amazing question to ask because uh, what we do as software developers is we solve problems, as you mentioned. And as you said, problems are normally very binary. So a machine never makes mistake. If you give it the right instructions, it does exactly as you want. The first understanding about us and us as humans is we are not a machine. We are very fuzzy. Our brains operate very differently. And we can't just say, I've given you the right instructions. Why do I wake up the next day and you still haven't recovered? It doesn't work that way. As you mentioned, it fluctuates, and that's the normal reality of it. The portion of that problem solving that helped me was that I said to myself, I'm not going to stop until I figure out what's going on with me. So that 1,001st query that brought up your video was maybe that part of me trying to solve this problem. And I was like, I know this has a solution. I don't think, even though it's something that no one has ever experienced before, that was my take on this. What I'm feeling, no one else has experienced before. So I just have to figure out the solution for it. And I know there's a problem out there that I can solve. But once I realized that, well, it's something that there is a solution for it, someone else has come up with it before me, it was very easy for me to follow it because I'm also really good at, because of the nature of my job, that engineering is very sometimes boring because they give you step-by-step instructions. And if you follow it, you make sure that when you build a plane, the wing doesn't come off. If you don't follow the steps, then there's no guarantee because you didn't take every single step. You didn't do every single measurement. You didn't do every single calculation. So for me, it was like, I know I have a solution and I'm going to follow every single step of it. And my wife was like, you don't have to do exactly like, I was like, no, that's exactly what I want to do. And maybe it was good or maybe it wasn't good, but it really helped me. But also what I learned about myself is that I'm not a machine. I don't have an on and off button. I have to be easy on myself and allow recovery to take its course. I can take every single step. I can listen to every single thing that Sean mentioned, that you do this and you do that, and it helps you. But also, I can't expect myself to wake up and put a green face on my app because that's just not how it works. Even up until now, there might be days that I wake up and I would put a red face on it because that's just normal human beings. We are normal human beings. We are human beings. And a normal human being, we have good days and we have bad days. And so it kind of did help me with just never giving up on finding a solution. And once I found a solution, making sure I'm very consistent. But also I had to make adjustments to the way that I operate, making sure that I don't expect myself and I don't expect the recovery to be linear because it wasn't linear. Sometimes it was much faster. And then especially when you were commenting on this right before you asked this question was that you mentioned in your book that 95% of the recovery feels a lot quicker than last 5%. And it's very, very important to make sure that you don't give up on the last 5% because that 5% puts you even ahead of maybe before you got DP. And that's really what works for me. So, and you just continue staying vigilant and making sure that you're aware of them and you bring some of those good practices that help you recover from DP to after your recovery because they're very helpful overall, just handling everyday's life situations.
Certainly. And also just having that intimate familiarity with anxiety prevents it from ever becoming a problem again. Because if you're, it's like what you mentioned earlier about having the panic attack, but not getting a correct explanation for it. And then where you're left with that, and you have to navigate the rest of it yourself. And then when you go through something like an anxiety-based condition like DPDR, like you go through the ringer with it, but when you come out the other side, which you will do, which you always can do, you know anxiety inside out, and you recognize it. So you take away all of that, the fight or flight response. Like if it ever pops up again in the future, you go, I know you. I know where this is. Like, and also,
Exactly.
and also if it, and also like the reason, like that we experience these feelings is because your brain thinks that something is wrong. It's your brain thinks that you might be in danger, and maybe if that's because of a panic attack or whatever. But after you've gone through an anxiety-based condition, if you ever experience that again, you spot it and you say, well, this is something I've experienced before. And that prevents it from ever becoming a problem again, because the reason it became a problem in the first place was because of a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of the symptoms. And interesting as well, you said about the last 5%, it's something I say to people all the time, is that like, when you are 95% recovered, anxiety is going to point at that last 5% and it's going to say, I don't know.
What about that? What are you going to do about that? Yes.
Yeah. And then when it's down to 1%, anxiety says, I don't know. You sure you can get rid of that 1%? Because that's the last 1%. That's going to be really tough, and it just, and you say, okay, thank you, anxiety. I know you're doing your job, but I've got other things to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now that you've recovered, Sam, and a question that people always ask me is getting back to normal after DPDR really getting back to normal?
I would say it's better than just getting back to normal, because one thing that you just mentioned is you have seen the dark days. You have seen the hardest one. It's like being a Navy SEAL and then being asked to go for a hike. You have done the hardest hikes. You have gone through in the depths and come out of it. And I think navigating a normal, well, first of all, you learn the value of taking care of yourself. That's what I learned. I learned that I go to the gym consistently because I enjoy it now. It makes me feel great. You want to feel great. Hopefully you fall into that rhythm that you feel great. And you see exercising helps. You see being kind to people helps. You see managing your anxiety by being very vigilant, as you mentioned, that because life will never stop throwing you hardballs, right? You can't, you see it coming. The difference is now you're a Navy SEAL. You see it coming before it hits you. So you can dodge it. And you kind of get good at it after a while. And I would just say, that's where I started. My ultimate goal, maybe in 2015, 16, was reaching enlightenment. I don't even know what that means, but I do know that after going through DP, I'm a lot happier. I don't grapple with issues as much as I used to. I think I had a little bit of an OCD mind, and a lot of, if you read, I'm sure you know, when I started reading on some of the comments and forums about the DP, a lot of people mentioned that they had they had a very OCD symptoms. I don't even flag them, or I don't even label them anymore. I was a little bit conscious about the fact that I would focus on issues and then go too deep into them. And that's sometimes not very healthy. And I think coming out of DP, I have learned how to let go of things easier. If I'm driving and someone cuts me off, before I would do everything I could to show that individual that I'm very frustrated, cut in front of them and brake checking them. I don't do that. I was like, well, this individual did it. If it really frustrates me, it's the whole concept of the pink elephant again. I'll just focus my mind on something else instead of the fact that he should not have cut in front of me. He did. What am I going to do about it now? So life not only is back to normal, I would say it's a lot better than before I learned about DP, because again, I'm a Navy SEAL now, managing a small team of, hikers in Los Angeles, and life is easy. I don't deal with the issues the way that I used to. And if it's something that I don't have any control over, because I do know I have no control over my mind and how it works, I just let it go. And I just don't sit in and think about a problem over and over. And thinking has become beautiful because my thinking now is something that is intentional. If I have a problem at work that I need to solve, I put time aside for it intentionally to sit down and okay, I have a problem, I have to solve it. Let me sit down an hour, I'll block an hour of my day and I sit down and focus on it specifically. But if I'm just driving and all these negative thoughts come in because of the practice of DP, I can catch them very quickly and then focus my mind somewhere else, or pop a new podcast and start listening to the podcast instead of daydreaming about something that doesn't really benefit me at all. So life is a lot better than before the DP and after DP recovery, I would say.
Good. That's great to hear. It's interesting what you mentioned about the OCD as well, Sam, because I definitely have a tendency towards obsessive thinking. I always have had, and it's the other night I was checking out of an Airbnb that I was staying in, and I checked the windows, all the windows in this apartment before I left, and I was leaving, and I was about to close the door, and I was like, better check the windows again, and I went and I did it, and I was like, and the thing is like I knew I was like, I checked the windows already, like I definitely did, but I kind of allowed myself to do it as well, because I mean, I also know that obsessive tendency, when it's like funneled in the correct direction, it's amazing. So if I take that obsessive tendency and put it towards like developing a film script or editing a music video or a short film or whatever I'm working on, then that's what it's for. Within reason. I mean, you do have to kind of say at some point, okay, I need to just export the project and be done with it. But that level of kind of intricacy and kind of taking that engine or taking that laser and pointing at something useful, then it's amazing. And also constructive. And also I think, it's that thing of like, well, I have obsessive tendencies, but also I have, that's also kind of part of, being creative and inquisitive and curious. And also for me, as you mentioned about going to the gym and stuff. So for me, okay, if the deal is that like every day, if I exercise, if I meditate, if I read, and if I do some creative work in particular, I'm going to have a good day. That's the deal. Mm-hmm. That's the deal, right? So because then the obsessive tendency, that box is ticked, then my brain's going, okay, cool, we got to do that. my body is happy because I've exercised, I've walked around, I've explored, and that is something that was, I mean, certainly taught to me, certainly with exercise during DPDR, because before my experience with DPDR, I don't think I saw the inside of a gym in my life. And then it became a big part of my life, and I love it. But it's just the value, the value of exercise. So for me, there was definite improvements after I recovered as well. So one last question for you, Sam.
Sure.
There's going to be people watching this interview who may be in the midst of struggling with DPDR, and who may be going through a very similar situation with similar triggers to what you experienced. If you could go back and have a chat with yourself when this first started, and if you could speak, well, if you're speaking to those people watching the channel right now, going through that, what advice would you have for them?
That's also a great question, and I would tell them that one thing that you mentioned in the book, and you said DP is not a very complicated psychological disorder. There might be other ones out there, that are a lot more complicated, and sometimes you actually do need medication for. DP seems very scary on the surface, and I certainly, again, I have experienced maybe quite the dark side of that and the depths of that. But the beauty of it is that it teaches you, just like going to the gym. We go to the gym and we have to stress our body in order for it to grow and get stronger. And I refer back to the statement of, if something doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. I'm going to go back to that and say, well, first of all, we know recovery from DP is possible. So that removes a whole bunch of weight off our shoulders. So if you're listening to this, I would just say, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's multiple people that you have interviewed, Sean, myself included, yourself included, that we know DP is a phase. If you treat it the right way, it's going to go away. But what should be also making it even more exciting to get to the end of the tunnel is the fact that you come out the other side a lot stronger, a lot more resilient. And as I just mentioned in the previous question, you might even live a happier life than before. There's a reason that we ended up in DP. For me, it was not taking care of myself, as you mentioned, not eating the right food, not exercising. Instead of being happy naturally, which is achievable in my opinion, I was using maybe alcohol or maybe weed just to numb me up and not think about stuff, the obsessive things that I would always think about. But going through this, you realize that don't need all of that. And once in a while, I still do enjoy a nice couple of beer. And trust me, if you're going through this, you will get to a point that you would enjoy. If you like drinking beer or wine or a shot of nice Jack Daniel, you would still enjoy it. But you're also aware of the limits, and you're also a lot more conscious of making sure that you take care of yourself, making sure you take care of your physiological and psychological self, and life becomes a lot more manageable after going through DP. Because again, you're a Navy SEAL now walking the streets, and you would be able to face any kind of challenge, whether that's at work, it's your personal relationship, maybe it's with your partner, and just things that you read on the news. We wake up every day and we see a piece of news that they're never really pleasant. And we realize that we can manage all of that if we know how to deal with our thoughts and our obsessive behavior. So there's definitely good news. Stay and trust the process. Give it time. Don't expect it to be on and off, because it's not going to work that way. Once you get out of it, help others, because I think that's very, very, very important. One thing that you also mentioned, Sean, in your book, that just spread the word. And you mentioned a lot of people disappear after they recover because they forgot about the fact that they had DP. But for me, it was so crucial part of my life that turned me again into a Navy SEAL, that I thought if I can help people, I would like to do it. And this is the least I could do. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
It's a pleasure, Sam. And that's absolutely fantastic advice. Sam, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I enjoy this so much. Thank you for taking the time to share your very carefully considered experience and to share your story in such detail, and the hardships and joys and the ups and downs. You know, one of the reasons I wrote the book in the first place and started doing this channel was just to share as many stories as possible, so that people going through similar stories could see those other people and know that recovery was possible. And I'm absolutely certain that your story will be an inspiration and a huge motivation to other people going through something similar. So it's invaluable. So it's very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you for writing the book. And one thing that I always enjoyed is that when you're reading the book, I could hear you playing with your beard, and I could hear that in the audio, which was wonderful. I think we were scratching it. Yes, that's how many times I've listened to that book, and I know every single detail of it. And thank you for doing everything and helping people, because this is the best job that someone could have. And thank you for that. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping me. And I wish everyone who's listening to this best of luck. Recovery is possible, so keep at it.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself, Sam. It was so lovely to speak to you. Bye bye.
You too. Thank you. Bye.